Montgomery Clift is a name that still echoes through Hollywood's golden era, a talented actor with haunting eyes and a magnetic presence. But behind the camera, behind the glamour, there was a story few dared to tell. What did Montgomery Clift reveal about the men he secretly loved? And how did these hidden relationships shape the life of one of cinema's most iconic figures? That's a story rarely told, but endlessly fascinating. Clift's life was a delicate balance between fame and privacy. In a time when being openly gay was more than taboo, it was career suicide. He lived in shadows, keeping his deepest connections hidden from the public eye. Rumors swirled. Whispers passed between Hollywood insiders. But Clift rarely spoke openly about his relationships. That silence only added to his mystique. Yet, over the years, as the layers of history peeled away, a clearer picture emerged. Biographers, friends, and even some of the men involved began sharing pieces of the puzzle, revealing a side of Montgomery Clift few knew existed. Many dated in secret, relationships that defied the norms of the era, and the emotional toll of living a life in disguise. But why was Clift's love life such a secret? What forces kept him silent? And what risks did he take by daring to love who he loved? And most importantly, who were the men behind these hidden romances? Actors, artists, and perhaps rivals, whose names have only recently come to light. This story is not just about secret love. It's about courage, identity, and the harsh realities of Hollywood's past. It's about a man who changed the game, quietly defined the rules while building a legacy that would influence generations. So, what did Montgomery Clift actually say? Who did he name? And how did these relationships shape the man behind the camera and the legend on the screen? Let's dive into the hidden history of one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures and uncover the truth behind the whispers. This is the untold story of Montgomery Clift and the men he secretly dated. A story of love, secrecy, and the price of being different in a world that demanded conformity. Montgomery Clift was Hollywood's golden boy, a symbol of brooding intensity and raw emotion. His performances in films like A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and Red River earned him critical acclaim and a place among the greatest actors of his generation. On screen, he was charming, vulnerable, and magnetic. Everything the studios wanted their leading men to be. But the public image carefully crafted by the studio system masked a far more complicated truth. Clift's persona was that of the ideal Hollywood star, handsome, talented, and mysterious. He was a typical leading man. He brought a new kind of sensitivity and complexity to his roles, which resonated with audiences. But behind this polished exterior was a man grappling with who he truly was, and the pressures of living in a world that didn't accept him fully. At the time, Hollywood was a harsh place for anyone who deviated from a norm. The industry demanded perfection, and any hint of scandal could destroy a career. For Montgomery Clift, being gay wasn't just a personal truth. It was a potential career death sentence. So while he never outright denied his sexuality, he kept it buried deep, living in fear that exposure would ruin everything he had worked for. Friends and contemporaries often described Clift as deeply private, even secretive. He was known to be gentle, introspective, and intensely loyal, qualities that made him stand apart from the more flamboyant stars of the era. But that privacy was also a shield, protecting him from the intense scrutiny and judgment that came with his true self. Off-screen, Clift's life was marked by a series of secret relationships and whispered romances. The men he loved were rarely acknowledged publicly, but their presence loomed large in his life. This duality, the public star and the private man, created a tension that followed him everywhere. It said that his vulnerability in his roles was not just acting. It was an extension of the real struggles he faced. Even his closest friends sometimes struggled to reconcile the two versions of Montgomery Clift. Some knew about his relationships, others didn't, and most kept their silence out of loyalty or fear. Hollywood's unspoken code of secrecy meant that many stories remained hidden, locked away behind closed doors. This complicated persona was further shaped by tragedy. In 1956, Clift suffered a devastating car accident that left his face severely injured and changed his life forever. The physical scars mirrored his internal battles, addiction, depression, and a heavy weight of isolation. But despite these challenges, he continued to act, pouring his pain into his work and captivating audiences with raw, emotional power. Montgomery Clift's life was a constant dance between his public image and the reality of who he was. The star that millions adored was only one part of the story. Behind the scenes, he lived a life filled with secrecy, love, fear, and defiance. Understanding this divide is key to uncovering the truth about the men he secretly dated and the price he paid for being himself in a world that demanded anything else. And just as the star struggled behind closed doors, the culture around him made it nearly impossible to live openly. But the story didn't end there. The secrets and shadows would soon lead us to the very men who shared those hidden moments with Montgomery Clift. To truly understand Montgomery Clift's hidden love life, you have to step back and look at the world he lived in, Hollywood during the 1940s and 50s. This was an era when the studio system ruled with an iron fist, carefully crafting the images of their stars to fit a perfect, marketable mold. Behind the glitz and glamour, there was a strict code. Anything that threatened the star's reputation could not see the light of day. For actors like Clift, this meant that their personal lives were never truly their own. The studios controlled everything, from what roles they played to who they dated, or rather, who the public thought they dated. Homosexuality was considered scandalous and career-ending. Many stars who were gay or bisexual hid their true selves out of fear of losing everything. This culture of secrecy was brutal. Stars were often assigned handlers or publicists whose sole job was to manage rumors and cover stories. For example, gay actors might be paired publicly with female actresses as a cover, or their relationships would be deliberately kept under wraps. Any slip-up could mean blacklisting or worse. Montgomery Clift lived right in the middle of this pressure cooker. He was already known for his sensitive and unconventional screen presence, and adding the layer of a secret life only intensified the risk. Unlike some stars who took extreme measures to hide their sexuality, Clift's approach was quieter but no less significant. He surrounded himself with trusted friends who understood his truth, but publicly, he remained elusive. The pressure wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. Many actors internalized the stigma, leading to isolation and loneliness. Clift's closest relationships with men had to be discreet, private, and often fraught with fear of exposure. Imagine living with a constant threat that the world you built could be torn down by a single rumor or revelation. The studios enforce these unwritten rules not only to protect their investments, but also because society itself was deeply intolerant. At the time, being openly gay was illegal in many states, and the public discourse was harsh and unforgiving. Hollywood stars had to navigate this minefield carefully, balancing their true identities with survival instinct honed by years of discrimination. Yet, even in this repressive environment, some stars like Clift quietly defied the norms. His relationships with men were never publicly flaunted, but neither were they completely erased. Friends, biographers, and later historians pieced together stories of his secret romances, providing glimpses into a private world that Hollywood desperately tried to hide. This secrecy shaped more than just personal relationships. It shaped the very careers of those involved. Clift's private life became one of the many factors behind the intense scrutiny he faced, and some argue that the pressure contributed to his tragic downward spiral after his car accident. Understanding the culture of secrecy in classic Hollywood reveals just how brave Clift was. He lived in an era that demanded silence and conformity, yet he found ways to love and be loved, even if it was hidden from the world. But the men he dated weren't just shadows in his life. They were real people with stories of their own, navigating the same dangerous terrain. Soon, we'll uncover who these men were and how their relationships with Clift shaped his legacy in ways many never imagined. Montgomery Clift's love life was cloaked in secrecy for decades, but over time, stories have surfaced naming some of the men he secretly dated. Men who themselves were navigating the tightrope of Hollywood's unforgiving social climate. These relationships were rarely discussed openly, but the whispers, memoirs, and biographies have helped piece together a portrait of Clift's private world. One of the most frequently mentioned names is William Messina, a Broadway and film actor who was a close companion of Clift's in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Their friendship blurred the lines between the personal and professional, and many close to them believed there was a romantic connection. Messina's reserved nature matched Clift's own discreet style, allowing him to maintain a relationship away from prying eyes. While never officially confirmed during their lifetimes, letters and accounts from friends suggest a deep bond that went far beyond friendship. Another figure often linked to Clift is Montgomery Clift's frequent co-star and rumored lover, John Hodiak. Though details about their relationship are murky, some historians believe Hodiak was one of Clift's earliest partners, a connection that influenced Clift's understanding of his own identity. Hodiak's tragic death in 1955 added another layer of complexity to Clift's emotional life, intensifying the sense of loss and vulnerability that followed. Then there's the story of Jack Larson, best known for playing Jimmy Olsen on Adventures of Superman. Larson was an openly gay actor in Hollywood's shadows, and reportedly one of Clift's confidants and occasional lovers. Their relationship was a rare exception in an era when openness was dangerous, and while Larson maintained a relatively discreet public profile, insiders say their bond was significant and genuine. Montgomery Clift was also rumored to have had ties with several other men in the industry, including lesser-known actors, writers, and behind-the-scenes figures who shared the same burden of secrecy. What united these relationships was a shared need for privacy, understanding, and acceptance in a world that offered little of either. Despite the scarcity of concrete confirmations, the courage behind these connections is unmistakable. Each man in Clift's life represented a quiet rebellion against Hollywood's rigid expectations. The risks they took were enormous. Exposing their true selves could mean not just ending careers, but public disgrace and personal danger. Clift's relationships weren't just personal affairs. They were acts of survival and identity in a culture determined to erase what it didn't understand. And while his name is most famous, the stories of these men shed light on a hidden network of LGBTQ+ individuals who shaped Hollywood's secret history. What's remarkable is how Clift managed to maintain these relationships while preserving a career in the spotlight. The secrecy was suffocating, but it was also a form of protection. And yet, even behind closed doors, love, complicated, secret, and defiant, found its way. These men weren't just shadows in Clift's life. They were anchors during turbulent times, witnesses to his struggles and his triumphs. Their stories, though quiet for so long, now invite us to rethink the history of Hollywood, not just as a world of glamour, but as a place where many lived double lives to survive. The truth about Montgomery Clift's private relationships reminds us how much courage it took to live authentically, even in secret. But the story doesn't end here. The pressure of secrecy and the personal costs were immense, costs that would soon take a heavy toll on Clift himself. Montgomery Clift's hidden relationships were more than just secrets kept from the public. They were a constant source of tension and turmoil that weighed heavily on his mind and heart. Living in an era that demanded silence, Clift's private love life became inseparable from the pressures that affected his career and, ultimately, his health. The stress of hiding who he truly was played out behind the scenes, contributing to a fragile emotional state. Clift was known for his intense, almost method-like approach to acting, which demanded vulnerability and emotional honesty. But that same vulnerability was a double-edged sword. While it fueled the performances, it left him exposed and vulnerable in his personal life. The fear of exposure, judgment, and rejection created an undercurrent of anxiety that was hard to escape. The turning point came in 1956, when Clift was involved in a devastating car accident. The crash left him with severe facial injuries and a changed physical appearance. It wasn't just the scars on his face that haunted him. The accident marked the beginning of a downward spiral fueled by pain, insecurity, and dependency on alcohol and prescription drugs. Many biographers and close friends have pointed out that the pressure of maintaining his secret life added layers to this decline. Hollywood was unforgiving to anyone who faltered. Clift injuries and resulting change in appearance made it harder for studios to cast him in leading roles, and rumors about his personal struggles spread quietly among insiders. The combination of physical trauma and emotional strain began to erode the career of one of the era's brightest stars. The constant need to protect his privacy meant that seeking help was complicated. Showing vulnerability in public could have been disastrous. Yet, despite these challenges, Clift kept working, channeling his pain into his performances. His roles after the accident reflected a deeper, more troubled man, complex, fragile, and searching for meaning. Films like Suddenly, Last Summer in Judgment at Nuremberg showcased his ability to convey raw emotion, but also revealed a man worn down by the cost of hiding his true self. The emotional toll of Secrecy was not limited to Clift alone. His relationship suffered under the weight of constant discretion, and the fear of discovery created barriers between him and those he loved. Isolation became a recurring theme in his life, as he navigated a world that demanded he compartmentalize his identity. In recent years, scholars and fans have revisited this part of Clift's story, recognizing how the societal pressures of his time forced him into silence and suffering. The intersection of his private life and career challenges paints a picture of a man caught between who he was and who he was expected to be. Montgomery Clift's experience highlights the harsh realities faced by LGBTQ+ individuals in mid-20th century Hollywood, a reality where love was hidden and survival required sacrifice. The weight of Secrecy didn't just shape his relationships, it shaped his legacy. But what happened after these struggles? How did Montgomery Clift's story evolve as new voices began to speak openly about his life? The revelations that followed would reshape the narrative around one of Hollywood's most tragic and captivating figures. For decades, Montgomery Clift's private life remained shrouded in mystery, a carefully guarded secret wrapped in Hollywood's culture of silence. But in recent years, new information, interviews, and biographies have begun to shed light on the truth, offering a more complete and human portrait of the man behind the legend. As LGBTQ+ history has gained more recognition, and the stigma around sexual orientation has decreased, historians and fans alike have revisited Clift's story with fresh eyes. Memoirs from contemporaries and previously unpublished letters have emerged, revealing not only the men he loved, but also the emotional depth and vulnerability he carried throughout his life. Some of the most eye-opening revelations have come from friends and family who chose to break decades of silence. These voices have confirmed long-held suspicions, naming names and describing the nature of Clift's relationships with a tenderness that had been absent from earlier accounts. The secrecy, once a heavy burden, now seems to highlight his courage, how he navigated a hostile world while maintaining authenticity in private. Biographers like Patricia Bosworth and Robert LaGuardia have played crucial roles in this reassessment. Their research paints Clift as a complex figure, a man struggling with identity and societal rejection, but fiercely dedicated to his craft and the people he loved. These modern narratives move beyond gossip and speculation, emphasizing empathy and understanding. More recently, Hollywood itself has begun to acknowledge Clift's significance not just as an actor, but as a queer icon. Documentaries, film retrospectives, and scholarly essays explore how his life and career intersected with the realities of LGBTQ+ history. They recognize the way his performances, filled with nuanced emotion, resonate even more when understood through the lens of his personal struggles. Yet, the journey toward full recognition is ongoing. The men Montgomery Clift dated are finally receiving some of the acknowledgement they deserve, their stories woven back into the fabric of Hollywood's history. Their courage, alongside Clift's, paints a fuller picture of community that existed quietly but powerfully beneath the surface. This evolving narrative challenges us to rethink the history of Hollywood itself, not just as a land of stars and glamour, but as a place where many live with profound conflict and contradiction. Clift's story is a reminder that behind every icon is a human being with fears, desires, and a need for connection. As we uncover these truths, we're invited to celebrate Montgomery Clift not just for his remarkable talent, but for his bravery in living an authentic life in a world that demanded conformity. His legacy is richer, more complicated, and ultimately more inspiring than ever before. What's clear now is that Montgomery Clift's story is not just about secret relationships or Hollywood scandals. It's about the universal struggle to be oneself, the cost of hiding, and the hope for a future where such secrets no longer need to exist. Montgomery Clift's life story is a powerful reminder of the hidden struggles faced by so many in Hollywood's golden era, especially those who loved differently and lived under the shadow of secrecy. His name is often remembered for his unforgettable performances, but the story behind the scenes reveals a man caught between a dazzling spotlight and a private world filled with love, fear, and resilience. We've seen how Clift's carefully crafted Hollywood persona masked a complex reality. Behind the charm and talent was someone navigating a secret life in a time when being openly gay was dangerous, even career-ending. The men he secretly dated, whether fellow actors or close friends, weren't just passing figures. They were anchors, confidants, and part of a hidden community forced to live in the shadows. The culture of silence in classic Hollywood made this secrecy necessary, but it came at a steep cost. The pressure weighed heavily on Clift's career, health, and emotional well-being, especially after his tragic car accident. His struggles with addiction and isolation were intertwined with the need to protect his privacy, a reminder of how harsh and unforgiving that world could be. Yet, decades later, new revelations and courageous voices have begun to rewrite Montgomery Clift's story. His relationships and identity are no longer whispered about in secrecy, but acknowledged and respected. This growing openness allows us to appreciate not just his talent, but his bravery, living authentically when it was incredibly risky to do so. Montgomery Clift's legacy is now seen in a broader light, as a trailblazer who quietly challenged Hollywood's rigid norms and whose life story offers hope and inspiration. It reminds us that the icons we admire are human beings with hidden depths, deserving of understanding and compassion. Thank you for joining me as we uncover the untold story of Montgomery Clift and the men he secretly loved. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into Hollywood's hidden histories. There's always more to explore behind the glitz and glam, so stay tuned for the next story that'll pull back the curtain on another legendary figure.